Visit took 3/4 of an hour, so we need to start. But if you need to go out or get bored, please feel free just to go. I don't mind. And please ask questions. Maybe hang on to your questions in the main bit of what I'm going to say, because you may find I answer them later, as it were. Okay, so welcome to the Chapel of the Sacred Heart, which looks very different today from what it did even 4 years ago. 4 years ago, it was a very dark place, in the sense that there wasn't a window. The stained glass windows, which were behind the people sitting on the side, were just black, covered in dirt. The same as the back, very dirty. And the walls were a sort of, if I remember correctly, a sort of grey, miserable, dirty-looking disdain. And all of this was pretty grubby as well. I mean, you could see that it was painted, you could see basic colours, but it was just grimy. And the floor was wooden boards, and there were old-fashioned pews in here. So it looked very, very good. This screen was also grubby. You've got the message by now. And the St Thomas's Chapel next door, which is where the exhibition is, was full of furniture, just piled up, old chairs, just stacked up on top of each other. And the altar, we didn't even know was there. It just was a furniture store. So what happened? What happened was that in 2010, part of the ceiling fell down. Wow. Unfortunately, nobody was in the room at the time, in the chapel at the time. And when the builders came in to, see what they could do, and they were crawling around in the roof space above here, they found that there were beams, but the beams were burnt. And the burning, of course, was from the time when the convent was bombed in the middle of the Second World War. And this chapel had been on fire, the roof had been, but the chapel survived. The part of the convent that didn't survive was the part that Sophie is holding so tenderly in her hands, in this statue. It's quite ironic, really, because this statue, which came to us as a gift in the 1920s, the building of Roehampton, which Sophie is holding, is based on a very early engraving of the buildings that were the convent, and before that, a stately home belonging to somebody or other. The nuns, when they moved in, built a chapel. Here it is. But that wasn't this chapel. It was a chapel that, if you're sitting where you're sitting now, you could see through the space here. So the little chapel of the Sacred Heart is sort of here. Now, Sophie, we're a bit worried about her powers as a saint, because she's obviously holding very protectively the convent of the Sacred Heart, this piece that was carved in the 1920s sometime, 1924, something like that. But of course, the only bit that survived the fires and the bombing in the Second World War was the bit that isn't there. Everything else went up in smoke. Anyhow, so the ceiling had fallen down, the builders, stroked their chins and said, oh dear, this is bad. And it's a listed building, so we have to restore it. So we had to get proper building archaeologists in to help us. And in the process of their research, they were testing the paint, they were, doing all the stuff they have to do. And while they were testing the paint to see what it was, just to get the sort of chemistry of it, so that we could restore like for like, they came upon these murals that were underneath. There's a green bit and a red bit. We've only been able to restore those two bits because it was going to cost millions if we restored everything. However, it was a total surprise to find under the grey, dirty paint these, not looking quite as bright and brilliant as they do now, but to find these murals underneath. And they photographed, with special infrared cameras and things, they photographed everything. And they found that those designs covered the whole walls, from floor to ceiling, all the way around. Which would have been a wow factor when you came in. So this was a complete surprise. Nobody in the English province had any idea that underneath that grey paint, this colour existed. So we all got very excited, and we got even more tip-top ecclesiastical archaeologists in. And in the end, we decided to restore just 2 samples so that you could see what has now been preserved under paint that has been, is special paint so that it won't destroy what's behind it. They cleaned the windows. We had no idea. I mean, whatever you think of late 19th, early 20th century art of this sort, it's not to everyone's taste, but they are beautiful in their colours. And we had no idea that something like this was there waiting to be discovered. And as we researched more and more, we found another connection which makes it particularly providential that ceiling fell down in 2010 and then later. We discovered that 100 years previously, i.e. 1910, there had been a mass in here reopening the chapel after it had been just redecorated, and the redecoration had been masterminded by Janet Stuart. So she called it in a letter to Mabel Digby a gem. She liked it very, very much. She got very enthusiastic, particularly about the ceiling and the design. She loved it. And other people thought it was a bit over the top, but she really did like it. So the ceiling fell down, was sort of saying to us, hello, 100 years to the year, obviously, in 2010, and we just had enough time to get it all sorted in time for the celebrations we're celebrating this year. So, why did Janet Stuart decorate it in this way, and what was it all about? Well, I want to go back a bit and tell you about the origins of this particular building. It wasn't the main community chapel, it was a little extra chapel that was stuck on the side. It was stuck on the side in about 1856 by a famous architect, ecclesiastical architect, called William Wardell, who was a follower of the better-known Pugin, Augustus Welby Pugin, who was the founder of the revival of Gothic-style to medieval-style buildings. Now, Pugin was late 18th, early 19th century, wasn't medieval, but he liked the medieval style, the style of the old medieval cathedrals and churches throughout Europe, because he thought it was the style that best suited worship. It was the style that somehow embodied Christian theology and Christian liturgy in his view. Wardell was one of his followers, believed the same thing and worked with Pugin for a bit. And was involved in the building of the chapel that is now no longer there, that was bombed, and was invited back a few years later to add this space because the chapel wasn't quite big enough. It was at that time called La Chapelle d'Étrangers, the strangers or the outsiders chapel. So it was I believe, now I can't actually prove this, but I believe it was the first space where Catholics in the neighbourhood, and there wouldn't have been very many of them, could come and hear Mass. They would come here, the community would be celebrating Mass in the main chapel. That grill wasn't there then, it was put in much later. So there was just an open space. And in the 1850s, it wasn't so very long after Catholic emancipation, about 20 years, maybe about 15 years actually. And my maths is a bit wrong there. 20 years or so after emancipation. So there were, the Catholic architects were busy building churches all over the place for Catholics because it had been illegal before then. But plenty of places like Roehampton, which at that point was a very sleepy corner out in the more in the country than in the city, didn't have anywhere where people who were Catholic in the area could go and have Mass. So this was the first place they could. Later, the Jesuits built a chapel down in the village, which has morphed into the parish church. But this preceded that by quite a few years. So its main role was for overspill, for perhaps ladies occasionally coming and making a retreat. They would come and pray in here, and members of the public would come in and pray, and also join in the Mass which was happening next door. Important thing to realise, though, is this wasn't there then. It was literally just the shell of the outside of the building. There was no altar, no stained glass windows, just very, very plain. No paintings on the walls, no fancy ceiling. There is a story, another story associated with the beginnings of it, which is about the remains of Santa Sabbatica. Now, Santa Sabbatica is a widow martyr. Her remains have been brought over from the catacombs in Rome. It was a tradition that when you built a new church, you had something holy in the foundations, and it was a sign of unity with Rome. The bishop of the time, the Archbishop of Southwark, had asked for the remains of a virgin martyr, because this was a common school. You needed a virgin martyr. He was furious, so the story goes, when he found himself the remains of a widow martyr. It just was unsuitable. However, it was too late to change, so the remains were put in the foundations. He waved his censer, said a few prayers, and stomped off back to Southwark in south central London. Now, when Mabel Digby was carrying out some renovation work 30 years later, she remembered this, or had been told the story, and to do her due, not everyone likes Mabel Digby, but good on her for this, she decided that had been disrespectful, because after all, though a widow, she was a Christian, Santa Sabbatica. So, she had the remains found and brought out and placed in the community parlour. One of the sisters had to sleep the night in the parlour because there was a retreat going on and there wasn't room for everybody, so someone had to give up their bedroom. It sounds a bit unlikely to me, this, but still. She was sleeping on the pallet, on the mattress in the parlour, with the remains of Santa Sabbatica on the table. And below was the clock struck 12. Bishop Morris, who was now dead, this is an important piece of information, he was dead. The ghost of Bishop Morris comes in and he goes 3 times around the table with his censer and his ghostly robes, and he says all the prayers correctly this time. So Santa, in reparation for his sin of disrespecting Santa Sabbatica. That's the story we found in the archives while we were looking at the stuff. It's a load of rubbish, but it's a good story, and I'm sure it entertained the little children of the story. Now, when Mabel reinterred the remains after the renovations were done, she put them somewhere here. Now, we don't know if they're in there, one set of beliefs that says they are in the casket. There's another set of beliefs that says they're under the altar. But the casket does sort of signify sacred names. What were the renovations that Digby was doing? What she was doing was brightening up the whole space, paid for by money donated by a parent of a novice who had just died. And this was in 1868. The novice's alleged dying wish was that her father be allowed in her memory to donate money so that the chapel could be completely repainted and dedicated to the Sacred Heart. So this is what was done, and it was at that time that this altar and reredos was installed. It was in white stone, and its origins are a complete mystery. It's in the style of the paintings it's not a copy of them exactly, but it's the traditional style of the paintings in Paris where Margaret Mary Alacoque, who was not a RSCJ, of course, had her visions of Jesus revealing his heart, which was the beginning of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century version of the devotion of the Sacred Heart, which was a much older spirituality than that. Just before 1868, only a few years before, Margaret Mary had been beatified. Do tell me if I get some of this wrong, but you know better. I get, it's all fuzzy to me, but I believe she had been beatified, and the devotion to the Sacred Heart that she had, those around her, in her name, had instigated, was something that the papacy in Vatican was really pushing, and was becoming increasingly popular on the continent and in England as well. So that was, why this sort of thing was put there, but we don't really know where it came from. There's an anonymous and undated note in our archives that says it came from Germany, but it doesn't look German to me. They're possibly South German, maybe. But I've been in touch with our archivists everywhere, in Central Europe and in Poland, and there are no records in their archives that anyone can find that say any of their communities expatriated something like this, and you'd have thought there would be a note. And when one of our communities closed in Germany, the Kulturkampf, which was secularization of the German state, which happened just after 1868, in the early 1870s, many of our communities closed then, and their goods were, where possible, handed out to other communities. But there's no note of this, so it's a bit of a mystery. And I can't imagine how it was brought in, because the only door at that time was this little door here. So it must have been in pieces, I think. It's all a bit of a mystery. So a lot more work to be done. So when Mabel Digby finished her renovation, this was here, but it was white. The wall behind was painted with a sort of fleur-de-lis pattern, possibly wallpaper. We don't know. The two big statues on either side of the reredos were still not there. They were pretty much there. And the chapel was now used by the school children who came and said their night prayers in here. And also, when novices or postulants came to join the community, they were taken by the superior on one side and the novice mistress on the other to make their first sort of self-dedication, as it were, their initial prayer, to join the community in here. And I'm sure the community prayed in here as well. So it now was focused more on the community rather than on the outside world, which is an interesting shift. The next exciting moment in the history of the chapel is to do with Janet Stuart. And this was in 1910, when she employed the best ecclesiastical designer, Catholic one, and stained glass artist of the period to come and beautify the chapel even more. I believe the reason she did this in 1910 she finished it in 1910, she started in 1909, was in response to the arrival in our country here of many of our French sisters who had left France in response to various secularizing laws in France. So the convents could choose under certain conditions to stay in France. Maybe Digby decided that she didn't want our sisters to do that, so they were exiled to various countries, including England. And the ones who came to England brought with them 3 precious relics or treasures. The most important one were the bodily remains of Père Baran, who, as I'm sure everyone knows, was very closely associated with the first copy 1815 Constitution and foundation of the South. Sophie's our founder, but Père Baran was one of her advisors. So he's very, very important. They also brought with them the remains of Sir Marie Laplace, who was a lay sister, RSCJ, from France, who had had her own mystical visions of Christ, revealing his heart, rather in the tradition of Margaret Mary, they were very different. But there's a whole load of work to be done on that too. I've only done very dabbled in it. And the chair that had originally belonged to Saint-Jean de Chantal from Autun, which was one of our convents, but had, I believe, been her convent earlier, and Madame Sophie visited Autun, the convent community had sat when this was her stall. So it's Madame Sophie's presence, as it were, her chair there in that door. But this Père Baran was the main important thing, and Marie Laplace as well. And I believe what Janet Stuart was trying to do was make this a suitable resting place for both of them. And it was her idea of becoming a sort of place of pilgrimage. It was a way of developing Cor Unum, because you would have, where was Sophie?
She went to Jet from
yes, okay, so Sophie, that's right, was going from France into Belgium as a result of the same political turmoil. Père Baran is coming here. So they were 2 equally important centres. Mother Digby would be in one, and Janet Stuart would be in the other. I don't know that she would have thought it all through quite in that way, but it feels to me that that was part of emotionally what was going on.
He was always put there first, very at the beginning.
Yes, yes. That was exactly. He hasn't been moved, except we had to, when there was water damage and things, flooding, we had to dig it all up. But then we went back.
And Marie Laplace was never before that.
Well, originally she. No, Marie Laplace was never like this. And one might wonder why. Yes. There are all kinds of politics going on. That's a very good point. I've actually thought of that. On the other hand, of course, you could say she's actually underneath. Just as special. Where was I? Oh yes. So she was painting the walls. She had the walls painted, and then she went to Rome in early 1910. In part, she was involved in the beatification of the cause for Philippine, which was at the beatification stage at that point. And while she was away, the community had painted, also got the same guy to paint this. So the walls and the ceiling were done, the windows were in, that they were also by a Catholic St. Lawrence artist. And this was white stone, which was what Janet wanted. But she obviously hadn't communicated this very well, because when she came back, that was painted too. And if you can imagine coming into this space, every inch was painted, including this. And it was really probably, for our taste, just too much. Even for Janet's taste, I think it was too much. Nevertheless, she still called it her gem. And at the same time, this screen was put in, and it had been covered with gold leaf originally. It wasn't anymore. But certainly couldn't afford that. And all of that painting of this was paid for again
relatives of a novice who had made a lot of money in building. And this novice didn't die, she did leave later on, she certainly didn't die, but it was a kind of dowry kind of arrangement, so they donated lots of money for that work to be done. And then, of course, the next thing that happens is maybe Digby dies, and Janet is named as the Superior General in her place, and it is a consolation to Janet, firstly to be able to arrange, I don't know what string she pulled, but as she was the boss, I suppose she could do what she liked, for Mabel to be shipped back here and buried somewhere around here, I don't exactly know where. And then, when everything was ready, Mabel was transferred here a bit later, and Janet was able to come and be present for that. And that was a consolation to her. Little expecting that in 3 years' time, she herself, I keep pointing to that, I'm sorry, it's just because I'm talking too much. That is Mabel, and this is Janet. So 3 years later, Janet herself dies and is buried here because, of course, she dies here. There's no special arrangements. The First World War is well on the way, and Janet has had to escape from Belgium, is sick and lies here. The stones were put in a bit later, and in one of the leaflets you can find translations of everything. So it's just, she's an incredibly holy, beloved person. That's the story, really, because after that it became a place of pilgrimage for people associated with the society who cared about their Anne, cared about Mother Digby and Mother Stuart, who cared about what they had learned about Sacred Heart, about the love of God, or had been at school here, college here a bit later on, and they would come and pray here. And it was really only after the Second World War, when everything else had gone and when this started to really degenerate, that people really forgot about it and nobody ever came in. Very rarely. After we had it restored, people coming. When I'm staying in the community chapel is up there, and so if I'm praying up there in the morning, there is always someone, I don't know who it is, every morning to come here and pray. And when students are taken for their first tour, either when they're coming to visit to see if they want to come to this university, or when they've just come and they're settling in, this is a must-see. They love it. Even if they never come in again, they remember this place and they mention it in their feedback to the tour. It is very technical, but I like the way we restored it. I think it gentles it down, but it's a nice space. And there's mass setting in now twice a week at lunchtime during term time. And we never used it before. So it's really becoming, if you like, in Janet's honour, I don't know, but it's becoming a place that's used. So that's it. I don't know if anybody has any, I've been talking great about the steam engine. If anybody has any questions or comments.
The writing on the windows it's Latin.
Yes, it's all in Latin. It's one of the, well, it's all, the windows of paper, it's all across the window, they are put in later. So, who chose the quotes, I'm not sure, and I haven't done you'd be better, I can't do it. So that's something I don't know. There are Latin inscriptions in various different parts. You can see the red band on the wall that covers the ceiling up there. That's also Latin. And there were more. The archaeological photograph shows that there were Latin inscriptions all around the edge as well. And I believe some of those were from the Mass of the Sacred Heart or the opposite. Because I don't know. I'm not familiar with it. So,
Prayer about the defendants. At the end of both of them is R, I wonder if that's
no inscription on the window.
Did your father's name start with R?
No.